I want to tell you about an encounter I had with a skinwalker in Canyon de Chelly in Arizona. It happened back when I was younger, just out of high school. That summer, a bunch of us, some friends and a few family members, we had nothing to do. We were done playing sports, and unlike other summers when we were lifting weights, playing basketball, and also getting ready for football season, this time we just found ourselves bored. So we decided one night to go check out a place called Massacre Cave and Mummy Cave. You get there by driving from Chinle to Del Muerto, and before you hit the town of Saley, there's a turnoff that leads to a parking area. These caves are known for their Anasazi ruins, way older than the Navajo or the Hopi that were in the area. Now your history lesson to give you context. The stories go that if you go there at night, you can hear screams, babies crying, drums, gunshots, and even horses running, all from back then, when the Navajo families were hiding during the long walk. Now this place is called Massacre Cave for a reason. Back in 1805, the army was going up against the natives, the children, the women, and the elders who had taken refuge in the canyon. They were hiding, and when they refused to surrender, the army would just kill the people. Now mind you, most of them were unarmed and also defenseless. If you don't believe me, Google it and you'll see. Anyways, one account goes that a woman, rather than letting the army take her and her child, instead of letting the soldiers kill her and her child, she jumped off the cliff with her baby in her arms. The families would hide here because there were a lot of places. They refused to be part of the long walk. They were going to have to round them up and have them walk for hundreds of miles. Those who refused were shot down, and many of them were killed right there. And this is why it's called the Massacre Cave. So that night, there were about 7 of us. We drove down in a friend's old van, and we were just hanging out near the overlook. After some time, one of the younger guys tossed a rock off the cliff. The drop was at least 200 or 300 feet, so you could hear it bounce and crash all the way to the canyon floor. A few seconds after the rock hit the bottom, that's when we heard something. A scream. And when I say scream, I actually mean a scream like a woman's shriek mixed with a cat's growl. It was loud. It was drawn out. We all froze, looking at each other like, what the hell was that? Some of us joked that it was most likely across the canyon, which was pretty far, and if something was there, it couldn't get to us. So we just kept hanging out. To be honest, I think some of us didn't want to look scary in front of everyone else. We all knew the stories. Skinwalkers, spirits, bad medicine. But you know how it is when you're young. You try to act tough, and deep down, some of us, including myself, were scared. Then, someone else threw another rock. And that's when I started to hear scratching as I was sitting in the overlook, like fingernails scraping rock. Everyone else was talking among themselves. And that's when I yelled at everyone. Everyone shut up. There's something crawling up. They didn't believe me, including the guy who threw the rock. So he threw another, and whatever was climbing up, I could hear it going faster. That's when we heard the next scream, coming from just underneath us, like about 20 feet below. It was that same sound again, half woman, half animal, and that was enough for us. We all ran towards the van and sped off. We started laughing on the way back. After dropping off a few friends, they all lived in the same neighborhood. It was just me, my friend, and his little brother. We came to some intersection near the edge of the neighborhood. I remember this so much. There was only one dim street light, and there was no traffic. We slowed down to a stop, and that's when I noticed something on the road, maybe about 20 feet ahead of us, right underneath the street light. It looked like some sort of red or gold ball at first, or maybe some torn up kid's toy. We assumed somebody just threw it out, or maybe it was just rolling down. But then, as we sat there, this thing started to move. It rolled really slow towards the van. It continued rolling until it stopped right by my door. When it stopped, I opened it and looked down. It wasn't a ball. It was the head of a cat. Its eyes were missing, and the rest of its body was a few feet away, torn up, legs and arms shredded. We were shocked. My friend then yelled out, "Let's get the hell out of here." And we sped to his house, parked, went inside the house, and we just sat in the living room. But within 10 minutes, every dog in the neighborhood started barking. My friend happened to have 3 big dogs in the backyard, and they were also going crazy, running around like they were chasing something. We actually opened the back door to see what was going on, but we didn't see anything. But they were acting like there was another dog back there. Then, my friend's sister came into the living room. I'm not sure how, but she knew something was off. She ended up asking what we were doing, and then just straight up said, "Something ended up following you back." We tried to play dumb, but she said, "Don't play stupid with me." We admitted that we went to Massacre Cave, and she just completely chewed us out. She told us to burn cedar, and that something was definitely following us. A few minutes later, their dad came out, pissed off, asking what the noise was all about. The sister told him everything, told him that we went up to Massacre Cave, and something happened to follow us back. Of course, he got mad too. He told the little brother to go out and calm the dogs down. I'm not sure why, but at this point we were lucky it wasn't us. But he also refused to go outside, saying that he was scared. You can imagine the argument between their dad and him. A few minutes passed and the dogs settled down. Eventually the sister and their dad went back to their rooms, and we stayed in the living room. I can't remember, but I think we eventually fell asleep around 3 in the morning. I ended up staying the night there. The next day we talked to my friend's grandpa, who's a local medicine man. He told us straight up, both the Skinwalker and some Anasazi spirit ended up following us back. He said the scream we heard was the Skinwalker, and the whole cat thing was their doing. The dogs were barking because they sensed something was there. The grandpa did a ceremony for us afterwards, and he warned us to never go back there. I also remember a story from one of my classmates who lived near the canyon, and he said that he had seen Anasazi spirits running around. I never believed it until that night. And even today, people still say that they see things in the area. I guess we learned the hard way that those places aren't meant to be messed with. There's a reason why everybody on the REZ says to never go to those places at night. You never know what's out there, watching, listening, and waiting to come back. I got a creepy story to share. Makes me not even want to be around livestock out here on the REZ anymore. You always hear stuff about strange animals, some of them who talk, about owls, dogs, and go to walk on 2 legs and all sorts of stuff. But this was different. My uncle told me that he bought a beautiful white horse from some guy before I was born. This horse was a living statue, pure white with blue eyes, and everything was beautiful about it. He brought the horse home and turned him loose with the rest of his herd. After the first week of owning it, he noticed that the white horse would always stand away from the rest of the herd, and whenever it tried to walk up to them, they would all take off. My uncle, being a horseman since he was a kid, he assumed that the horse wasn't accepted into the herd just yet. A month had passed and the horse was still the outsider of the herd. One day, Uncle's neighbor from down the road stopped in to tell him that there was a group of coyotes taking down his calves. He warned that if they were eating them, they would most likely turn to the horse as well. That night, Uncle called over his friend and waited until dark for a stakeout. The night fell and the two headed to the fence line that separated the 2 properties. About a mile away from the fence, they parked up on a ridge where they could see everything. It was a full moon and they could see the whole land around them. The 2 were just talking quietly and waited, listening for the coyotes to start singing. A little after midnight, they started to hear a little bit of what sounded like thunder. They looked off to the side and saw the horses running, coming in fast. The horses ran down into the valley below the ridge. My uncle was watching and carefully just counted his horses, and he noticed that the white horse again, most likely bringing up the rear. The horses settled down in the valley, but you could tell that something was bothering them as they were pacing in a big circle. Then, from the dark tree line, the white horse came out. It started galloping, and halfway to the herd, it stood up and ran on two legs like a human, but just as fast as a horse. Uncle hit his lights, and the whole valley was lit up. In the brightness, the white horse was still running on two legs, and it sounded like it was laughing. The sudden lights caught the herd by surprise, and when the white horse reached the herd, it tried to jump on the nearest horse. The horse bucked and kicked and screamed, basically sending the white horse flying. The herd then bolted, taking off to the far side of the valley. Uncle and his friend just sat there frozen, staring. Down in the floodlights, the white horse slowly got to its feet. It wasn't limping. It just stood up like nothing happened, back on two legs. But this time, it was watching them, just staring. My uncle said that they quickly got in the truck, with their rifles with them, but nothing else happened. They went back and left the scene. They knew it was something with witchcraft going on, so they drove back to the house, just silent the whole ride. And the only thing they said was that they would take care of it in the daylight, in the morning basically. My uncle said that he didn't sleep that night. The next morning, just after the sun came up, Uncle and his friend, they went out together. They rode out to bring in the herd. Sure enough, the horses were scattered and scared, but he was able to round them all up and drive them into the holding corral, all of them, except one, the white one. He saw it standing in the far corner by the old round pen. It was just waiting there. They were able to close it inside. Then they rode back to the house. By the time they returned on foot, they each had a rifle. Uncle said that the white horse was just there, staring at them as they approached. But when they got close enough, it did something that froze them. The horse started to smile at them. Not the way that you think. You know how sometimes a horse will move its mouth and it'll look like it's smiling. Nothing like that. He said it was peeking at them, smiling through the bars of the gate. That's when my uncle shot the horse. Afterwards, they dragged the body out, and they also lit the body on fire. He said the smoke that started coming off of it was thick and yellow, and the smell, it was like a plastic and rotten smell. To this day, my uncle says that it wasn't the horse getting up on two legs that freaked him out or anything. It was the way it smiled at them, through the bars of the gate. When my uncle tried to find the guy he got the horse from, he couldn't find him. As far as he was told, the guy ended up skipping town a few days after the sale. My uncle was trying to get some answers, and of course, his money back. I wouldn't be here telling you about these things if it was a skinwalker that I came across. Matter of fact, I would go far beyond and say that most stories you hear online about people coming across them might not be true. Maybe it was just a spirit. Skinwalkers like to operate in secret. They don't like to be seen. That's why I said I'm not sure what this was. I mean, maybe it was one. I've been told so many stories about how someone goes to see a medicine man and they confirm it. I didn't. We didn't go, and we didn't find anything around. But I do sometimes wonder if it was just a spirit. I'm not sure, but here's my story. In New Mexico, on my REZ, I lived in a wooded area with steep hills and rocky parts with trees and small cedar bushes. It was around midnight, like around 11:30 p.m., and I live upstairs by myself, while my two sisters and my mom, they live downstairs and they each have their own room. I stay up all night mostly watching movies, playing video games, or just listening to music. So it was almost midnight and my dogs kept barking. They wouldn't be quiet. This usually meant that some random horse, or maybe some cow or something made their way into my fence, and I knew I was gonna have to chase them out. At least this is what always happened. But right when I got outside my back door, the environment just felt different. You know that gut feeling that you just know something is wrong or that something is gonna happen? Well, on top of this, I swear I heard voices slightly up my hill. Now it's dark where the floodlights don't reach. I stand there thinking that I'm sure I just heard something. Or maybe it was just in my head. So I stand out there for like 3 minutes, and I was about to go back in when I hear a man's voice. It calls my dog's name, but they spoke in Navajo. It was saying, "Come here, Badger. Come here, boy. Don't you remember? It's me." Of course, my dog wasn't paying attention. He kept aggressively barking and growling. I slowly back up into my door, as I heard so many stories before that if you see something, you didn't. So you better believe I was taking my ass back inside and ignoring anything that was going on out here. I was trying my best not to make any noise, and so I closed my door. By the way, I have 3 dogs, and they all started barking. Looking back, maybe I was panicking and assumed that maybe somebody was breaking in. In those moments, you don't really know how you're gonna react. So my initial reaction was to text my sister, who works for the local police department. I was like, "I just heard a man's voice behind the house, up the hill." She doesn't reply, so I assumed that she was on a call or something. As I'm inside trying to figure out what to do, I start to hear this loud object outside my front porch, and that's when my other sister texted if I heard anything. I told her I'm in the kitchen, and so she comes out and we both look outside the window. So much for not looking out the windows at night, or ignoring any strange noise you hear at night. I think in those situations, that's always going to be your initial reaction. So that's when we saw the white Home Depot bucket that I had used earlier that day. It had been thrown from wherever it was originally onto the dirt driveway. My sister looks at me and says, "The wind most likely blew it. Maybe that's why the dogs are barking, because of all the wind that's going on. And maybe it blew the bucket as well." I forgot to mention that everyone else was at work. My mom was a single mom, and she worked overnight, so it was just me and my sister. At that time, we were the only ones home. I didn't tell her about the voices I heard when I was outside, because again, I didn't want to make this into a big situation. What if it was just in my head, and I was just hearing things? I do think it's crazy how you try to justify everything when something creepy is going on. So I just went back to my room. I remember it was 3 in the morning, and I still hadn't gone to sleep, when I heard something fall right behind the wall that I was laying my head at. I put my phone down and listened. I heard it, again, in Navajo. I'm not sure what it said, but I knew it was talking to somebody else, because from what I could catch was, "Check door." I didn't hear my back door knob jiggle, or I didn't hear anybody trying to break in, but I did hear that person say, "Lock." In that moment, I was thankful that I locked my back door because I couldn't remember if I had or not. It was quiet. I could just hear my heart thump in my ears, and I convinced myself it's time for bed, and I should just call it a night. By the way, this was during the summer, so summer nights would get hot, and I would have my windows cracked a little bit to get some air, but I forgot that one of my windows were open. I guess I eventually fell asleep, because just an hour later, like around 4:20 a.m., I started to smell rotten flesh. I quickly got up and looked around my room a bit. I got a really big headache. My head was pounding. Then I heard that voice again. It was in Navajo, and this time it was directly right outside my window. Whoever, or whatever it was, said, "Yes, I see." I went into straight fear. I felt paralyzed, so I just went underneath my covers and started praying. I started praying for protection and whatever is out here to leave, and that they were not welcome in my house. Without realizing, I woke up to the sound of birds chirping. I was happy it was daytime. It felt like a dream. I had to prove to myself it was real, and that it wasn't my mind playing tricks on me. So I went to check for tracks or signs about last night. There were no footprints or anything, only cow prints up where I heard the voices, and around my window as well, and also on my sister's window. That night I was skeptical, but nothing happened, and my older sister did text me back that morning. She said that when she got home, she looked around but didn't find anything, nothing even tampered with, or signs of a break-in, and that maybe I was just dreaming from where I don't get enough sleep. Like I said, I don't think it was a skinwalker, because I don't think I would be alive right now. And why would they come after us? 2, I don't think it was a thief, and I only say this because of that putrid smell that came inside my room. Some people say that when spirits are around, they give off some sort of smell. What do you think? One time when I was in Phoenix, Arizona, a friend of mine invited me and some other friends to a barbecue on this REZ, so I decided it would be a fun event to go to. There was about 10 of us that drove out that day. I drove my Chevy Camaro and took my girlfriend with me. The other cars were mostly pairs of friends, for a total of 5 cars. Anyhow, so we depart from Phoenix and drive for a few hours past Mesa, towards my friend's REZ. When we got there, we could see that it was very secluded. The entrance to it had nothing around it for miles. We drive down the dusty road until we got to a group of houses sitting in the middle of nowhere. This was where my friend and his extended family lived. The surrounding area was desert, just plain cactus and rock desert for as far as you can see. There was a cluster of sagebrush about 500 yards off to the right. But besides that, the houses and the road, there was nothing else. The night started off great. We had a great time eating all types of food and BSing with each other. Then about 10 p.m. or so, someone mentioned that they thought they heard something off in the dark. And of course, that started off the scary stories from my friend's family. They started telling us a few stories about a half horse, half man that has been spotted by a few of them. Aside from this story, they told us a few more, but apparently they were not scary enough for my girlfriend. Once she heard them, she said she wanted to find one of these things. So she started wandering off towards the sagebrush way off, and I figured I would let her go stand around in the dark. I let her get all the way to the bushes before I went after her, as I started to feel guilty. Once I caught up with her, I convinced her that there was nothing out there, and that we should head back. After arguing for about 5 minutes, we went back to our friends. Once we got there, we all said our goodbyes and went out. This was about midnight, and it was very dark out there. The only lights being the few at the house cluster, and our vehicle lights. Besides those 2 sources of light, it was pitch black for miles. We happened to be the last car ready, and so we were also the last in our 5-car caravan. We got about 10 yards past the house cluster when my headlamps, and everything else, started to go out. This is the first time since I have owned the vehicle that this happened. I thought nothing of it. I called my friends in the first car, told them to wait up, and inspected the fuse box. I found the issue was just a blown fuse, so I replaced it with a spare, and turned my lights back on, and continued down the road. About 20 yards down, my lights cut out again. At this point, my girlfriend was freaking out in the passenger seat. I told her there was nothing scary going on, and it was just the wire causing the short. After calling my friends at the front again, and replacing the fuse yet again, we made it all the way to the end of the road, at the edge of the REZ, before it happened again. I replaced the fuse with my second to last one, and quickly sped off and went home. The ride home was uneventful, just a dark desert all around as usual in Arizona. Nothing else happened while we traveled home. However, as I dropped her off, right when I pulled into her driveway, the fuse happened to blow out again. So I popped my last fuse in, and I told her I was going to head out, and I'll see her later. That was the last time the fuse went out. I went home to my apartment, crashed out, and slept awesome. When I woke up the next day, I noticed I had a bunch of missed calls from my girlfriend. I called her back, and she immediately answered. telling me to come over and whatnot. I went over there and was greeted in the kitchen. Both of them were looking as pale as ever. When I asked what happened, they told me, apparently after I dropped her off last night, the dog they had started acting strange. She said that when she went upstairs to sleep, that the dog was barking at something downstairs. She said that she thought she heard a noise, but she couldn't tell over the dog barking. Her roommate then told me that she was lying in bed trying to go to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she would hear weird noises around her, like if something was inside her room. She explained that she heard the dog barking at something as well, and had never felt anything like that before. They told me about what happened in the morning. When they opened the door to let the dog out, a healthy-looking dove flew in after the dog went out. The dove took about 10 steps into the house, then fell over and died. I didn't think much of it, and I took her back to my place to get her mind off of it. This worked until I dropped her off again that night. The next day she told me that the dog still barked all night. Her roommate and her thought they heard things, and she also said that every time she closed her eyes, she would see some horrible images. At that time I decided to ask my native friend what he thought about it. Instead of him laughing about it, like I expected him to, he instead told me that she better burn some sage in the house, and that he was going to tell his family to burn some as well. Apparently they were going to drive out any bad spirits. After telling her what he said, she quickly bought some and did so. That was the last time I heard about her trying to find something supernatural, and after that day, she said everything calmed down. I guess be careful what you wish for, and even if you're not native, apparently the spirits don't discriminate. Y'all stay safe out there. I'll start with some background. In 2017, I was 28. I lived in Texas. I grew up in a small town, but I always liked a simpler life. I'm currently living at my grandmother's house. She left it to my dad before she passed. It's a little tough because I mostly raise the animals that she left behind, and there isn't much money to be made by it, but I wasn't trying to stay for more than a year. It's a log cabin with 3 enclosures. Chickens, pigs, and some goats, which I don't bother with much because goats. It's pretty far from pretty much anything. There's a town about 20 minutes by car, and that's taking a guess, and there's some neighbors a couple of miles down the road, but I'm surrounded mostly by trees. The cabin is in a big clearing, but the road out of here has forest on either side of it. Anyways, 3.5 months into my stay, I had gotten the hang of screwing around with the animals. Mostly I would gather eggs. I sold some of the pigs and I would mostly gather eggs. I decided recently to try and butcher one. It's pretty quiet out here. I have a gun, but the truth is that I don't even care to use it, let alone carry it with me. So the day comes and I want some fresh pork. So I take the pig out of the pen and I tie it to a pole not far from the house. Then I shoot it. I thought it would be easier, but hell no it wasn't. The thing runs around screaming for a good 2 minutes before falling. Fuck me. So the pig finally dies. I have butchered with my uncle before, and I get through it pretty efficiently. I figure I could do it. The only problem is that I'm a dumbass, if you can't tell. Especially when I'm not being supervised. So I put everything into a bucket, and guess what? I forgot it outside. I forgot to mention that after the pig had finally kicked the bucket, no pun intended, eventually everything else around me seemed to stop too, even the chickens. Now I brushed it off as them seeing a brutal crime and didn't pay any attention to it. I take the meat to the old butcher's block and I cut it up the best I can. I throw away whatever I don't need. I store some of it and I cook the best parts the same day. I screw around for the rest of the day on the computer, mostly looking at pictures. It's a hobby of mine. Around sundown, I was upstairs to where the bedroom is. and I was just relaxing with the window open looking at the sky. I was getting pretty intrigued by some sounds that began to come from the woods. I thought that maybe if I was lucky, I would get to see some sort of wolf. And I thought to myself while hearing these noises, the howling is awful these days. I actually never been such an outdoor kind of guy, so I'm not familiar with the forest creatures. The window overlooks what is the back of the property, but if I stick my head out, I can see most of the left side and part of the right side too. The clearing is also larger at the back. I'm keeping an eye out for the wolves, hoping to see them all in their majesty. By now it's dark, and I finally see some movement in the tree line. But then I think, well, that's a funny looking wolf. And then I think to myself, is that a Sasquatch? I'm clearly seeing something standing up as it walks out of the damn trees, maybe 8 feet tall. I never even believed in these things. As it makes its way to the clearing, I flinch and make some sort of gasping noise, and I see one of its legs. It's bent backwards. It also heard me. Well, little curiosity was keeping my fear in check. I realized 2 things. Both of the legs are bent backwards, not just one. And 2, it heard me from about 300 feet away. What seems like forever passed, and then it bent over and started running towards the side of the cabin, technically towards where I killed the pig, which I didn't realize at the time, as it was at the left side but at the front. As it's running, I catch some light hitting it from the side, and I noticed the snout, not too large, and its ears pointing up. I feel bamboozled as I wanted to see a real wolf, and not see God's curse to mankind. I'm freaking out at this point. I close the window and I grab my gun. I put a dresser against the door. I might have mentioned that I'm on the 2nd floor, but I obviously and clearly wasn't thinking straight. Meanwhile, the pigs start raising hell, and after a while, I'm wondering if it's gonna come for me. I hear a loud crash, more like a smack, and then the sound of footsteps and really heavy running. Like this thing was running. I look outside without going too close to the window. This werewolf thing is running away with a fucking pig under its arm. The thing seems shredded at the back of it. I still remember those heavy footsteps. It wasn't even 10 p.m. by this point, and I had to spend the rest of the night on the bed with my rifle in my hands, just to feel like it wasn't in the room with me. Finally, morning came. I was able to make my way out of the room and downstairs. Thank the heavens there's no sign of anything trying to get in, but I think I would have heard it if it was trying to get in. I check around as best as I can through the windows to see if anything is near the house. All I see is the chicken pen and the pig pen, and the goats were too far to the side to see from the front. There's blood everywhere, parts of pig all around the place. The chickens are gone. I can only assume at this point that the goats suffer the same fate. I muster all my courage and run out to the Jeep. I book it out of there and go into town, but I realized that I had a phone and I didn't call anyone. Say what you will about me, but anyone who has been terrified to that degree will know that under such circumstances you do whacked out stuff. And to be fair, the phone wasn't even charged or in the room when I saw what I later researched. And I called it what a lot of people call it now, a dog man. The name still gives me shivers. I finally get into town. I have no phone. My parents live 3 towns away from here. I don't know the number off my heart. You might be wondering, how do you not know your parents or your home phone number? Basically, the lesson here is, don't be lazy, like me. So I was basically stuck in town at this point. I make my way to a grocery store because I basically only got friendly with a guy who stacks the shelves there. He's a few years younger than me, but we have a lot of things in common. I go in, I see him, and I start walking up. He turns and sees me. His eyes go wide. He then says, "Hey man, you're really pale. Are you alright?" Long story short, I told him everything. He says that I can stick around with him for a while. I start kicking a can outside until he gets off work. I follow him to his place. He lives with his parents, but they're super sweet people. He put me up without even a second thought, and I was a stranger to them. He hands me his laptop and tells me to try and look up whatever I saw, or what might be wrong with me. He then says, try the dog man and see what comes up. So I looked it up and I see a bunch of results, testimonies and all sorts of stuff that confirm what I saw. And apparently they're not friendly like dogs are. I start to freak out again. My friend sees this and he tells me to just chill. He puts on music and brings up some pizza before asking some more details. I ask him how he knew what these things are. He said that he believes in them. Says that he heard them as a kid. Before he looks up a Sasquatch call, the stuff comes on like at 1,000,000 decibels on his bass sound system. It scares the hell out of both of us, but it kinda just lightened the mood. It made us laugh a bit, but this is also where I got an idea. And looking back, it's also where I already started screwing up. I thought I was gonna man up and get revenge on these things, but if you looked up Dogman, you know where this is going. The internet says that they hate loud noises like air horns, and that they also tend to hunt dogs and cats. I ended up asking if he can lend me some money. He agrees. I go out and I buy the cheapest loud sound system that I can find. I end up sticking around for a couple of days downloading sound files, putting them on a flash drive, trying to get familiar with all these legends about this dog man, some animal sounds, and all that type of stuff. I then head back to my house with my chest in the air, with a plan in mind. I get in the door and the windows seem untouched, so I feel a little better about it. All is good. It's time to set up. I take the sound system outside, and I put it about 30 feet from the back of the cabin near the window. I throw the extension cords through the bedroom window and then go back inside. I barricade the ground floor as best as I can. I basically shove furniture around. I gather up all my things into this bedroom. I go up and barricade the door. I connect my laptop, and I wait. It was still quite early during the day when all this was done, and I felt very uneasy waiting. I almost backed out, realizing that I was being very dumb, and I didn't care to go outside. When the sun finally started to set, I decided that it was my time to put my plan in action. I started to find cat noises on my flash drive, playing them for a good 20 minutes on and off. I made sure that I can get enough time in between to listen to any possible sounds. Then I hear it. It seems to be working. The thing from before comes out of the woods a bit further, to the side from the last time, on all fours. I was getting the chills, but I wanted to get rid of this thing. I had pulled the curtain and the windows as much as I could, without severing the extension cable. The sun was down by now, but the moon was still bright in the sky. I could see it better this time. I hadn't realized what kind of beast this was. This thing was ripped, unholy. I was shaking. I put the cat sounds on with the lower volume. It pinpointed the sound instantly and started walking towards it. I turned the volume up to full and I waited. I had to pick something, a very loud noise. I thought about using a noise that you would see on social media, but I kind of went against that. I sat there and waited. As it got closer, it kind of took its time before standing up again, and it was actually walking over. Once it was about within 5 feet of the speakers, I turned it on. What happened next left me in too much shock to laugh. The thing jumped in pure pain and most likely fear, easily 5 feet into the air, and it landed on its backside. Not that it stayed down. I felt the thud as this thing hit the ground before scrambling to its feet on all fours and running. I did find it funny, but the sound that it made hitting the ground did scare me. I was thinking of how much that this thing must weigh, how much muscle it has on it. But what really scared me was how it growled when it left. It was that kind of growling that just pissed it off more than anything. I didn't fall asleep that night, and a few hours later, I found out that this was a good reason. 2 came out the second time. Both were close in size. Maybe the second one was smaller, just a little bit. And I also think it has a slightly different color. Other than that, both of them are the same. I get the sounds again, but I put a dog barking directly on loud volume. They charged at this thing. I maxed the volume while basically being frozen in fear. Once they got close to the speakers, I turned it on. It was enough to stop them in their tracks, but it didn't do what I thought it was gonna do. They basically just kind of shielded themselves from it. I went into fight or flight mode. I grabbed my rifle and opened the window as much as I could. They were able to pinpoint me right away, despite the sound from the music. I pulled the trigger. I hit the brownish one in the chest. It just flinched. I was trying to empty the whole clip into these things, so I was just going small. Small side note, their gaze is that of the devils. I have never seen anything that evil. I hit it again, both times in the chest. It tried to give me a quick hateful glare before running the other way on two legs. The other one glared at me too, but started to turn to follow the other. I, on the other hand, was not done. I shot at that one too. I'm not sure, but it looked like I hit it in the shoulder. But if I did, it just seemed to shrug it off. I fired my last round, and I don't know if I hit anything. I felt like I won a battle, but I was extremely shook up. All this to do nothing basically to them. I think I made the right choice when I got my stuff in a hurry, and threw the bookcase in front of the door, ran downstairs and broke a window just to get out. I got into my Jeep and started to leave. I went to my friend's house directly. His parents were shocked at the state of me. I left in the morning, and I just went back to my parents. I had barely told my friend anything, and it took me at least a week to tell my parents anything close to what happened, without sounding insane, that is. They of course didn't believe me, and they were just mad that I screwed up my grandmother's old house. This is what happens, so don't fuck around with anything. That seems unnatural. It's been about 30 years, but they are still listening. They're around us. When I was young, I remember my aunt would burn tobacco, and my grandma said that her father would burn a fire using old rags. One of my tribes used angelica root to burn, but I see many people have forgotten our old ways and use sage and others. An elder of a neighboring tribe told me to hang pepperwood leaves by the doorways, as they are always trying to find a way in. If you're listening to my story, I'm giving you this wisdom so that you can smudge afterwards. Not to water down the effect, but because of what I'm actually going to share with you can cause you harm, as they're always listening. Use a feather or at least your hand. Never blow and you could be adding negative to the smoke. Make sure you open a window so that any negative things and spirits can leave. Smudge yourself good before you go around the house, telling the spirits to leave because they don't belong here. Last, very important, always put the ashes back onto the land. Not to go too much into detail, but you're giving back to the land what you took. It's actually quite disrespectful to just throw it away in the garbage. I lost a cousin to suicide because he couldn't deal with the visitation of evil things. He was a great guy who had a lot of livestock that he cared for. I went to school with him. He was funny and caring. One time, I was riding a horse that was green broke, and it fell and rolled over me. I didn't know he was behind me, but as it happened, he was right there beside me and made sure I was okay. He helped me a lot, especially with handling horses. So I would see him riding his horse in the distance, rounding up his livestock. Little did I know he was having issues. The first incident was when he borrowed his dad's truck and didn't come home like he was supposed to, as he was trying to sneak home by turning off the headlights. He was negotiating a turn which required lights. When he turned them on, he said there were several Skinwalkers standing on the side of the road waiting for him. He said he just gunned it home, and they started running after him. He jumped out of the truck and ran inside. Several times he said he was riding his horse and going across the arroyo, which was deep and wide, and they were always there waiting for him. He started drinking heavy because he couldn't deal with it. His parents became Christian and they told him to pray. He tried, but nothing happened. It seemed like he was getting desperate and trying to find a solution from his cousins, but they didn't have any resources or didn't know how to help him. This was in the late 70s, and at that time, nobody really understood depression. They were also drinking heavy because of depression as well. I was just a kid, and since he was older, I thought he was okay. I myself was in a very depressed state due to neglect and drinking at a very early age. For several years, he was at the stage where he started staying in Gallup, walking the streets. He kept selling his livestock until he only had a few left. He would tell my parents how he was just getting visited by skinwalkers. He must have been in his late 20s when he took his life. My grandma said the skinwalkers were looking at him every night. They didn't believe him until the night he shot himself with a rifle. The next day, his mother and father looked under his window and saw a milk crate and several animal tracks leading to the arroyo, turning into human tracks. After he died, the family, not his parents, talked about how it must have been someone who was jealous of him and might have put a curse on him. They believed that the skinwalkers that were after him were hired from other people, feeding off his fear. Unlike typical American stories where skinwalkers are shown as flesh-eating monsters, they are said to live off invoking fear and are actually hired to curse individuals. This, combined with him being open because of depression, created a torment that he couldn't escape from. The tragic end was the result of those fears and the weight of his depression. When the family looked around the area where he had taken his life, they found a small bag that included some weird beads and items that belonged to him, including pieces of his shirt. The only thing that we found out that his parents did mention is that he was having nightmares of where he would wake up and be surrounded by individuals who were covering their faces. However, there was one who wasn't covered, and he said his face was demonic. So a few things I want to say. I didn't really grow up knowing about my roots or my culture. Everything I learned has been from Creator, the land, and other Dinya family members, sharing their stories and wisdom. My parents didn't really teach me that much, as they ended up becoming Christian just like my cousin's parents. But now that I have grown, I would like to help you if you are listening. In the Navajo culture, we know that these things are real. Depression is real, but so are the tricksters. They simply don't just leave forever. The nightmares that he was having were not just simply dreams. We believe and know that when you have dreams like this, it means those skinwalkers were actually around you while you slept. If you dream of being attacked, this means sickness is coming for you. It's important to seek out a medicine man to do a cleansing, to find the issue that's going on. We do ceremonies to get rid of all the bad medicine. The grandma of my cousin believes that if a proper cleansing had been done, maybe he could have found peace. The spiritual and physical world are deeply connected. Recognizing one often requires addressing the other one. Please don't try telling me that he's in a better place. There's a reason why we don't acknowledge the dead or associate ourselves with the Americanized culture surrounding death. I won't go too much into this, as I don't want to draw bad energy into your life. So now, to my story. I haven't even started, but I will make this quick. I started having dreams and nightmares of my cousin, but it wasn't just happy dreams and visions of him, similar to his nightmares, and the weird part is that this was decades after. I'm now married, and even my own children are grown now. I smudged all of us and even the house itself, but this didn't seem to be working at all. Eventually, there was one dream that kickstarted my journey towards seeking guidance. It was a random night just like every night. I knew this wasn't good as some elders in the REZ had told me about these things. I was sleeping and in my dream, it felt so real that I had woken up in bed. But as I got up, there were these 3 spirits, or maybe even demons, that looked human. They were standing at the edge of the bed. 3 of them were looking at me. One of them climbed over the bed and the other two went around and they started sticking their hands into my stomach and chest. I could feel the pain, and I would try to wake up, but I couldn't. But then I would. But then I would realize that I'm not awake, because it would happen again, almost like if I was stuck in a loop. Even my wife heard me yelling for help on one of those situations, and that's when she said that we needed to reach out to one of the elders. One of the local medicine men came by our house, and he basically spent the whole day with us listening and asking questions. At that time I didn't know, but now I know he was basically asking to find out the root, the cause of everything. I even told him about the whole situation of my cousin and what happened. Then he starts looking around the house for anything, and he also asked if I knew of anyone who might be looking to harm me or might be jealous of me. We both tell him no. He starts asking more questions, and he advises that he's gonna perform a group ceremony with other individuals. This does eventually happen, and I won't go too much into detail as these ceremonies are personal journeys for everyone, and what happens in these ceremonies stays in the ceremonies. Afterwards, the medicine man came to our house and started counseling us in the traditional way. He knew I wasn't raised that way, so he advised that I should always seek counsel no matter how old I get, as we're always learning, and they are always watching. As he was getting ready to leave, he said, "Why don't you all have arrows or sticks on the wall?" He then tells us to buy arrows and hang them on the wall. Then to hang your bow in the center of the house away from the door. When this is all done, put the arrow at the doorway pointing towards the door entrance at an angle. The arrows are there to protect you from bad medicine. Make sure they go in the direction of the sun. Do this in every room. The point of this is so that nothing evil comes through your doors while you're sleeping, because if something wants to come in, it will stop, simply because of the arrows that are hanging. Whatever it might be, will be concerned that you are sitting somewhere in the dark, waiting on it to enter, and you have your bow drawn ready to release it. It's also to catch and kill any bad prayer coming to your house. He also said that I invited a bunch of bad energy when I started smudging, as I was doing everything the wrong way, and was actually inviting bad medicine into my life and into my house. He also taught us how to smudge the correct way, just how I explained to you in the beginning. Don't think for a second that just because you YouTube how to smudge the native way, that you are doing it correctly. There are reasons why ceremonies are only conducted by individuals or elders. There are reasons why smudging ties back to where you got the sage from. If it's been blessed by the elders, there is more than just physical activity going on. You must visualize the smoke surrounding and carrying away the negative energy while you are burning the sage. Just burning it and walking around the home will not clear a place or thing. First of all, smudge yourself before you even enter the home. Burn enough so that there is a good amount of smoke. Enter the home from the left side and complete the entire smudge exiting the home on the right. While smudging, pray and ask the Creator to protect you, your family, and your home. Depression is real, and there are evil people out there that will seek individuals who are struggling with this to send bad medicine their way, possibly even the curse of a Skinwalker. If it's still lingering in your home after everything, something negative has latched onto you that doesn't leave because it knows that you like it being around. Basically, that you felt comfortable with it being there. If someone or yourself is bothered by smudging, even more reason to seek a cleansing. This could be depression, addiction, or any past issues. Nobody can control your spirit unless you let them. My cousin couldn't handle the visitation of these things. He didn't seek help or counsel. It's crazy when you think about it. The combination of someone being jealous of him to the point that they would actually go out and cause harm by putting a curse on him is the fucked up nature of the heart of people. Imagine dealing with this shit, with what my cousin was going through, and still having evil, terrible dreams with manifestations of skinwalkers after you all this time. But that's what skinwalkers do. All the BS you hear of skinwalkers, this and that. Skinwalkers take joy in making your life hell. They're not even gonna eat your face and take your skin. I don't care if you believe in our culture. Words have power that come into existence. And even though my parents are no longer here with me, they did end up becoming fully devout Christians. There is something that sticks with me that they share with me all this time. I believe it came from the Bible that they were reading. I'm not sure where it's at, but I remember my father saying, "The heart is deceitful and desperately wicked above all things." It's true that while people tell you to follow your heart, sometimes the heart is the most evil thing of people, and these things that happen to my cousin can actually happen to anyone, to you, to me, as they are always watching. I'm not gonna make this story so long, so I'm not sure how much to share, but if anyone wants to know more details about me, do let me know. I'm just scratching the surface on the nightmares, and now that I look back, as I'm recounting my life's journey, there are so many other things that happened the way they did, and it all ties back to the situation with my cousin. Look for help, for counsel, if you're dealing with any sort of depression or mental struggles. The enemy is always waiting for any opening around your house, for any exposed area in your life, whether that's the window remaining a bit open or the door. Close those things in your life. I know it's easier said than done, and it might take some time, but seek help if you need to, as they are always watching and also listening. This story is unfortunately true. I changed names and ages slightly for privacy. I grew up in the Sierra Nevadas. It's a really beautiful part of the world with sprawling pines and plenty of lakes. I wasn't big on camping, but I spent a good chunk of my childhood weekends hiking with family and friends, and also spent many summer days tubing on the lake. On the summer that this happened, I was 16, about 10 years ago. Now my cousin Celia had come back from her first year of college, and her boyfriend Jay was visiting to meet her family and friends. Jay, like most visitors, wanted to go on a hike with lake views. Celia and I decided to take him on one of our favorites, a moderate hike through the woods on a gentle incline that peaks in the trees overlooking Lake Tahoe below. Jay had some hiking experience, but it was in less rugged terrain, and we thought this hike would be a fun challenge with the views that he wanted. It's an in and out trail that takes about 2 to 3 hours to the top and 2 to 3 hours back down. There are some smaller trails that branch off and offer steeper inclines, or even ways down towards the lake. The three of us set off on the hike. It was the first Saturday of his visit. The trail isn't the easiest to find, but it's really popular with locals because of the view and general lack of tourists. It was mislabeled on the most popular trails website at the time, so it was hard to find. We passed only a couple of other hikers, mostly granola-type couples with camelback water backpacks, hiking with their dogs. We made it to the top in good time and enjoyed our lunches overlooking the lake. Jay was impressed by the views and spent a lot of time taking pictures. In between selfies and bites of sandwiches, we mostly just relaxed and got to know each other. After about an hour of relaxing, that's when we heard it. A scream in the distance. Specifically, a mountain lion scream. If you never heard a mountain lion scream, it's really unnerving. It sounds a bit like a very loud, terrified woman letting out a blood-curdling shriek of terror. Look it up. It's truly a horrible sound. This was not good, because when a mountain lion screams, it's part of a mating ritual, or two male lions are fighting. Either way, hearing one scream meant there were multiple mountain lions, and pretty close. The bears in the Sierras are softies, but the mountain lions will attack you. They will attack your pets. They've even been known to attack bikers. There's safety in numbers. but even 3 is risky if you're talking about a hungry lion. Jay was really freaked out. There weren't that many big animals roaming around where he's from, and the thought of an animal large and willing enough to eat him was off-putting. Celia and I were alarmed, but not too scared. Between the natural disasters that occurred in the region and the sometimes deadly wild animals that got close to town, we were fairly unshakable. We had seen plenty of bears and snakes on hikes, and sometimes encountering critters is the price that you pay to enjoy the natural beauty. This also wasn't the first time that we heard mountain lions, and we had both seen them before. Of course, mostly from the safety of a cabin or a house. There was also an incident where, as kids, we laid out some expensive steak in my backyard, hoping that a mountain lion would come so that we could take pictures of it. It didn't work, and my mother was unhappy about the steaks. Anyway, Celia and I told Jay that it was fine, but that we need to pack it up and get back down the mountain. We packed up the leftovers of our lunches, and we took off at a faster pace back down the mountain. About 40 minutes into the hike back, Jay realized that he forgot his phone at the lookout in his rush to leave. Of course, after a brief back and forth between Jay and Celia, we decided to go back and get it. Actually, we decided that Celia and Jay would hike back up to retrieve his phone, and I would stay there, on the trail, alone, to warn any other potential hikers that there are lions in the area. I was mostly worried about those hikers with their off-leash dogs, and wanted to prevent a dog from getting mauled to death. This was obviously not ideal for any of us, but it seemed like the best choice at the time. I found a nice rock to sit in the shade, just off the trail, and was going through the pictures we took on my phone and playing Temple Run. There was no cell service or internet, but I knew they were going to be back soon. Celia and Jay had been gone for around 50 minutes when I heard the scream again, and it was hard to tell, but I swear it was closer than before. I started to get pretty nervous. Being in a group is better when dealing with mountain lions, and I felt like I was the perfect bait just sitting there alone in the woods. About 20 minutes after that, I heard the scream again, and there was now zero fucking doubt that it was closer. It sounded like it was coming from up the trail, towards where Celia and Jay would be coming down. Logically, I knew that lions don't scream when hunting. They are actually quiet. If there was a lion stalking me, I wouldn't know it. The screaming actually meant that it was doing something else, something not feeding related. However, knowing this did not make me less nervous. I actually became hyper alert, whipping my head around every time I heard a noise or thought that I saw a flash of movement. I turned my flashlight on even though it was the middle of the day. I got off my rock to stand in the middle of the trail, to have visibility up and down, and in the trees on the side of the trail. A couple of minutes after that, I heard it again. It was extremely close. By this time, I had full goosebumps and a pit in my stomach, a complete sense of dread. I looked around and tried to find the best place for me to stand, with my back covered in case of the worst. I decided to wedge myself up against a tree next to the rock that I was sitting on. I had good eyesight up and down the trail still, and into the trees across the trail. I continued scanning around, focusing my eyes where I thought the screams were coming from. Suddenly, I saw something, standing still, 20 feet up the trail. It was a man. He was completely naked. He was filthy. He was dirty. He was skinny. And he was just standing there, looking at me. I didn't even hear him come up. I know this sounds cliche, but it really was like he appeared out of nowhere, especially since I was just focused on looking for a lion. If you don't know where you're going, it's easy to get lost in the woods around there. The weather can change quickly, and people panic and get more lost in their attempts to find their cars. It doesn't take long, being alone, lacking food and water, in the wilderness, to make people confused, a little crazy. My first thought was that this man was most likely a lost hiker, and judging by how dirty he was, he had been lost a long time. He needed help. I heard cases about people with hypothermia stripping all of their clothes off, and maybe that's what happened here. Now, this was during summer. There's no way that this could happen in July, but that didn't occur to me until later. I started walking towards him, asking if he's okay. As I'm walking, I get this feeling of something being wrong. I'm not sure how to describe it, but my feeling is dreadful. The hair stood up on my neck. I stopped in my tracks, maybe about 15 feet away now, and had the overwhelming feeling to run away. It felt wrong, and he also looked wrong in a way that I can't even explain. Instead of wanting to help him, I was now terrified. I asked again if he's okay, and he looked at me. Then he opened his mouth wide and screamed. Not a normal scream. He screamed just like the mountain lion, a high-pitched scream, a shriek that made my blood run cold. It occurred to me that we were most likely hearing him the whole time. It was the single most terrifying thing I ever seen. I was so scared that I started screaming too. I was getting ready to run away down the trail, but I also didn't want to turn my back on him. Suddenly, he closed his mouth, turned around, and ran into the woods very quickly. He disappeared into the trees, but that feeling of everything being wrong was still with me. I felt like I was gonna throw up. I considered running down the trail to get away, but I decided to wait for Celia and Jay, who arrived within 10 to 15 minutes. I told them what happened, and we decided to call in to the Rangers when we got service. Celia and I had seen some odd things in our lives. Her more than me, but she turned white as a ghost when I told them what happened. I guess they didn't hear anything on the way down. I always been disturbed since the incident. Did I see a mentally ill lost hiker who maybe needed my help? Or did I see something else? Celia insists it was a skinwalker or something similar. Something mimicking the call of a mountain lion and stalking us down the mountain. It's been a long time. I'm doing alright. I don't go hiking that much anymore, especially in that part of the country. The Rangers did ask me to describe him, and despite staring at him from fairly close, I couldn't tell them his eye color or facial features. He was tan, and with some dirty blonde or brown hair, and his face was just sort of weird shape. He also didn't have that much of a beard, and you would think that someone in that condition would have one. To be honest, it was just how still he was that seemed wrong. I don't want to say unnaturally still, but that's what comes to mind. And no, I never heard from the Rangers. They said they would check my description against missing hikers. I also think he ran away extremely fast for anyone, much less a dehydrated and mentally ill hiker. I'm not sure what we saw. If anyone knows what this could have been, let me know your thoughts. Be safe when you go hiking. This story happened just this summer. I'm only now getting around to writing everything down. I would consider myself an outdoors man. I grew up in the quote-unquote sticks. I spent a lot of my time wandering in and enjoying the backcountry. I'm older now and have settled down in the suburbs. A wife, 2 boys, a house, and a dog. A job in a cubicle, the whole suburban shit. I want opportunities for my kids that come from a suburban life, but I also want them to grow up with an appreciation for the outdoors. So when my oldest son was big enough for his first father-son camping trip, I was excited. My wife and younger son stayed home for this summer trip. I know it was going to be a great bonding experience for me and my son. Because my son is just 5, I didn't want to do anything too extreme on our first big solo camping trip. We needed a place that wasn't too deep into the Colorado Front Range. We needed a place that wasn't too deep, but still allowed for dispersed camping. I don't consider camping in RV parks or established campgrounds to be actual camping. You might as well be at a motel watching TV. Camping at most is a tent, a sleeping bag, and a fire. There was a dispersed camping area that caught my attention. I had never been to this area before. There were no facilities and it was dispersed enough you couldn't see or hear other campers nearby. My son and I had a blast that day. We set up camp, collected firewood, we went hiking, we saw a moose and a bobcat. We did try a little fishing, and finally, as the sunlight faded, we returned to our campsite to light a fire. We had a traditional and nutritious camping meal of fire-burned hot dogs and marshmallows. Definitely making some good memories for both my son and me. The perfect first camping experience for a preschooler. At least, that's what I was thinking. After all that fun, my son and I were exhausted. It was time for bed. The sound of the summer breeze through the pines is better than any commercial sleep aid. I don't remember drifting off, but it was one of those hard dreamless sleeps that only being physically exhausted can bring. One thing about my son is that he got many things from me. Hair color, eye shape, but one thing that he got from his mom was sleep talking. It's not strange to hear him having full conversations in his sleep, but it gets more pronounced when he's really tired. But something woke me up from my void of sleep. Not sure what woke me up, but I sat up collecting myself. The world seemed to be at peace. It was quiet, just me and the breeze through the treetops. I couldn't figure out what woke me up out of nowhere, but that's when the sound of my son, laughing in his sleep, cut through my groggy state. It was a deep belly laugh. Man, it must have been a fun dream, I thought to myself. Gently rocking him was enough to quiet him down. That must have been what startled me, I thought. As I repositioned to fall back to sleep, my son bursted out laughing. I sighed and closed my eyes. He'll quiet down soon enough, I thought. But he laughed again, except this time, his laugh was echoed by something outside of our tent. I held my breath and listened, unsure of what I just heard. It wasn't an echo. There was something out there, and it was laughing in unison with my son. My grogginess was replaced by the adrenaline as it began to pump. It couldn't be real. It had to be my imagination. I sat up in my sleeping bag listening to the night, hearing nothing. After a minute, I felt my body relaxing. I started to settle back down. I must have been hearing things. I was exhausted after all. Checking the time, I saw it was 4 a.m. The sun would be up in a couple of hours. That's when my son laughed again. And again, it was answered with some laughing outside. I was now sure it was not an echo, as I was trying to make sense of what was happening. That's when the voice outside called out my son's name. My blood ran cold. That voice, it was so familiar. Then it clicked in my brain. It was the voice of my younger son. But that wasn't at all possible. He was safe at home with my wife, miles and miles away. That's when I started to hear twigs crunching beyond our tent. It was impossible to tell the distance from us, but there was definitely something out there, circling our tent. Then, I heard it call out my son's name in that little toddler voice. My 5-year-old son, who was still fast asleep, called out to his brother, asking him to play. The thing outside the tent laughed in reply, and it urged my son to come outside. That thing with my little son's voice sounded cold. It sounded hollow, dead. The floodgates of my adrenaline burst open. Cold sweat formed on my face. I was scared out of my mind, but my primal caveman brain roared to life. I was in Papa Bear mode. Nothing was going to take or hurt my son. I was going to put a stop to this. Whatever was out there, I didn't care. You don't mess with my children. Say what you will, but when you're camping miles from anything, it's not worth the risk of being unarmed. Wild animals, even people, you have to be ready for. I always take a gun with me when I'm camping. Pepper spray and bear bells are great, but nothing gets attention from a threat faster then the sound of chambering around. I spoke loud into the night that I had a gun and was coming out. I hoped the fear in my voice was masked by my aggressiveness. The only reply was the breeze through the treetops. My son was still asleep, and my wife and I had joked that he could sleep through a tornado. Stepping out into the cool summer night, a gun in one hand and a flashlight in the other, I surveyed the campsite. The fire was down to embers. Our fishing gear was leaning against the pickup. The firewood was still neatly stacked. Nothing seemed out of place. Not wanting to stray far away from the tent or from my son, I sat down outside the entrance. I waited in the dark with the flashlight off, and not far into the trees, I heard a branch break, then another one, except this time it was closer. I stood up and flashed my light in the direction of the sound, but nothing was there. The voice called out, this time from behind, and this time focused towards me. "Daddy, Daddy." It was my youngest son's voice again, crying out for me from the dark forest. I threw the light beam from where it was coming from, and that's when I saw a pair of shimmering green eyes, illuminated by my flashlight. They were only 2 or so feet above the ground, the same height as my youngest. I took a small step towards it. The eyes, unblinking, remained in place. Getting closer didn't help reveal this thing. It almost seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight, almost like it was devouring it, almost like a black hole. I couldn't make out its size, or shape, or color. It seemed to swallow up all the light around it, except for those 2 green eyes. That's when this thing started laughing its toddler's voice, this time with malice. And the eyes never looked away from me, never blinking, focused only on me. Not wanting to give up any ground, I stepped towards it again, and it didn't move. Not knowing what to do, I screamed as loud as I could. I started to wave my arms to scare it away. The eyes then shimmered, and as I stared back, the eyes shifted from green to amber. That's when they started to rise up into the air. I now knew that this thing had been crouching and was now standing up. I could only watch in fear as the eyes finally stopped rising, nearly 10 feet off the ground. The night air erupted with a deep growl. I could feel all the vibrations inside of me. I couldn't see a mouth, but I could hear teeth snapping. That's when my son in the tent behind me began to scream. And that was the only time the eyes lost focus on me and shifted towards the screams of my son. My only reaction was to fire my gun into the air. I did, and that's when the eyes quickly vanished. My ears were ringing, but I could hear the growls turn to shrieks, followed by the sounds of crashing branches and undergrowth. I stood there until I couldn't hear the shrieking anymore. It went deep into the trees. I was left with only the sound of the breeze in the treetops and the quiet sobbing of my child. Twilight was beginning to illuminate the forest. Shaking and being exhausted, I sat down in the dirt in front of the tent, and I tried to collect myself. "Daddy, where are you?" My kid was shouting. That got me out of my daze. I picked myself up and went into the tent to retrieve him. Putting him in the truck, I locked the doors and wasted little time breaking down camp. We were out of that camp and back on the road by the time the sun started to break. I have no idea what that thing was. I do plan to camp in that area again, without my family, and definitely with some friends. I want to find out more about this thing. Thankfully, my son doesn't seem fazed by anything that happened that night. Thinks I was chasing a bear away from camp, and maybe he's right. Well, I hope he is. My son can't wait to go on another camping trip, but truthfully, I'm thinking the next family camping trip might be at an RV park, or even a motel. I mean, be considered family camping, right? I live on a 13-acre land where the suburbs turn to farmland. My parents live in the main house near the road, while my fiance and I converted one of the barns on the back half of the property into our house. Our house and another barn are set in a pretty wide clearing, but beyond that, we're surrounded by woods on 3 sides. All of this to say that we don't get many visitors out here. From the time we moved into the house almost a year ago, there have been some situations where I get this unexplained feeling of fear while I'm outside at night. I lived in the woods my whole life, including places far, far more remote than this. But I have never had this feeling before. The woods are home, and every other place I lived they felt like my woods. But not here. I had the feeling that I'm trespassing on someone else's land. Someone who is not happy to have me here. The other night I took my dog out for his last walk. It was around 11 p.m., so it was pitch black outside the ring of light that was casted by the floodlights on the side of the house. As I was walking towards the edge of the tree line, where my dog does his business, I heard a sound like someone imitating the sound of an owl, coming from the direction of the other barn, about 30 yards away to our right. I was so sure it was a human making the noise that I called out. "Ha, very funny, Dad. I assumed it was my father closing up the barn for the night, and he was taking the opportunity to try to scare me." But no one called back. It was at this point that my dog lifted his head from sniffing all over and froze, staring towards the barn. His hair stood up along his spine, and he started giving a low, menacing growl. Now this dog is obsessed with all people and animals. Everyone is a friend waiting to be made, and I've never seen him this aggressive towards anything, even other dogs that have tried to fight him. My dad especially is his favorite person on the planet, so there's no way he would have started growling towards him. Now, it was my turn for all the hair on my neck to stand up, as a cold wave of fear hit me like a brick. My dog had stopped right at the edge of where the light met the darkness of the woods. Normally, the light gradually fades into the trees, still providing enough sight to see the outline of trees and shrubs, but this time, it ended with a solid wall of black. Suddenly, I heard that same fake sound, the sound of an owl, from only a few feet away, just on the other side of the darkness. My dog jumped and started barking, putting himself between me and the sound. He's only a little guy, so I darted towards him, scooped him up, and took off running towards the house. Behind me, I heard the sound again, but this time, it had a strange warble to it, almost like it was laughing. The next morning, I went out to check on the barn. I found the doors had been partially broken off the slide and were swung past each other the wrong direction, like someone had tried to force them open the wrong way. There were no signs of footprints in the sawdust or dirt, or any other signs of an intruder. I have no idea what was out there that night, but I will say, my dog and I stay well within the floodlights when we go out, after dark now. I have talked about my road trip on here before. I took the first vacation of my life last year. A rebuilt Yamaha and a foolish sense of optimism carried me across the western United States. Being adventurous seriously made me rethink everything I thought I knew about the world. I love Seattle with the hip original hippie neighborhoods and the carnival atmosphere of Pike Place Market. Getting out of Seattle was a total nightmare. Restricted to back roads by a motor that capped at 40 miles an hour, I must have gotten lost a dozen times, despite all the help I received from baffled gas station attendants. So I was behind schedule when it came to finding my campsite. Some miles south and a little east of the city, there's a free campground. It's most often used by horse riders. And boy, can you smell it. That's actually what guided me in the last few miles. There's a gravel road off the service road, and then a few crooked unpaved roads off of that. The trail markers were all bent, broken, or faded. In the end, I had to follow my nose. I set up my junior scout tent in the fading twilight. Mine was the only one there. I had the place all to myself. After a quick meal of apples from a previous campground, I did my travel log on my video camera before turning in for the night. I'm not sure how long I slept. I know I checked the time, but I can't recall what it was. Something had disturbed my well-earned beauty rest, but I was too groggy to remember what it was. That's when I sat up, too alert to fall back asleep, but too sleepy to be totally awake. That's when something brushed the side of my tent, and suddenly, I was more awake now than I had ever been. I had done plenty of camping by that point. I was familiar with the sounds of the nighttime critters, from raccoons to coyotes. Nothing had ever bothered me in my tent before, just snuffle around camp before wandering off and leaving me be. From the sound of the footsteps, it was walking on two legs. My mind immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion: a bear. There's a lot of conflicting information out there about how to deal with bears, and a lot of it depends on the type of bear. Sitting there in the dark with my heart beating in my throat, I had no way of telling what kind I was dealing with. Should I shout out or play dead? I was about 30 yards from a sturdy cement block outhouse that might be better shelter. As quietly as I dared, I slipped my boots on and got ready to dash. The zipper of the tent seemed impossibly loud in the night as I worked it slowly and slowly. After getting it to be fully open, I slowly went outside. Once outside, I craned my neck around to see if the bear, if that's what it was between me and the outhouse. With the incredible illumination of the Milky Way, I could see the campground clearly all the way to the tree line. There was nothing out there. However, I had this feeling that something was watching me. It was like feeling an insect crawl along the back of my neck. There was no logical way for me to know that something had its eyes on me out there in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, all alone. I couldn't dismiss it. Still on high alert, I crept along and tried not to crunch the gravel under my feet too loud. The outhouse was still my best bet. The door was propped open by a stone, but inside there was a heavy-duty bolt lock. I would have to spend the night surrounded by the smell of not only horse, but also human poop. But I figured that was a fair trade for not getting killed or eaten. My hand was on the latch when I heard the awful crunch of footsteps and gravel behind me. I kicked the stone propping the door open out of the way and slammed the heavy metal door shut, no longer caring how much noise I made. Whatever was on the other side had fingers. Something tugged on the door as I struggled to bolt it shut. I won, but it was close. There was a metal mesh along the top of the outhouse for ventilation. Through the top, I could hear the heavy breathing that matched my own. My phone was back in my tent because I'm an idiot. There was no way to tell time. That's when the same stupid impulse that brought me out there in the first place kicked in. I had to know. Hello? Silence. Maybe this person didn't hear me. But then, hello? I could have shit myself. I was in the right place for it. The voice sounded like my own, and the sound of it was a kick to the gut. I couldn't even tell you why it made me so uneasy. The sensation was like when you're walking upstairs and you're expecting another step, but your foot comes down on an empty space. I'm sorry. I thought I was alone, I said. I am alone. Every syllable was off. Hey, I'm sorry, I freaked out. I didn't think there was anyone else out here. Sorry, I'm here. You would think that if I knew it was another camper, I would have opened the door, but I never did. Some deeply buried instinct kept me from taking my hand off the bolt. Hey, you scared the crap out of me. Are there more tent sites out in the trees or something? I am something. There are more. The words made me sick to my stomach. Again, I couldn't have even told you why, only that they did. and from its odd speech, I guess English wasn't his first language. Do you need to go? Use the bathroom, I mean? Because I'm going to be in here for a while. That wasn't a lie. I wouldn't even open the door if it was my own mother on the other side. You need to go. Its English was improving with every sentence. There was something weird about that. Hey, look, I'm sorry if I scared you, but you started it by creeping around in the dark. I'm not gonna come out. Can you go somewhere else? I'll be gone in the morning, I promise. I just wanted to sleep in peace.
You need to be gone. I promise you, I creep in the dark. You won't be here in the morning.
Fear closed my mouth shut. The more I spoke, the more he did, and I didn't want to hear his voice anymore. I'm sure that made me sound like a bigot or something, but I had the feeling I was feeding words to him, and the feeling was not pleasant. It felt like he was hungry for them. The same instinct that told me to keep quiet the first time kept me from running my dumb mouth off again. I was dealing with someone who was not mentally well, or was something else. The way he was speaking, and the way his words were coming out, and the tone and voice, there was no doubt that he was going to carry out what he was saying. I kept my hands on the boat, while they cramped on the first rays of sun, crept through the mesh at the top of the walls of my shelter. It wasn't until the sun was strong enough to make me sweat in my self-imposed prison that I felt brave, stupid, enough to speak again. Hey, are you still out there? Hello? Anyone? There was no answer, which was the best outcome I could hope for. I opened the door. My tent was untouched, at least from a distance. The oppressive feeling of being watched had dissipated. I dressed and broke down camp in record time. My moped cranked to life, but it wasn't until I went to put my helmet on that I saw the footprint. I had kicked that rock pretty far. It was close to my bike. Naturally, I went over to it. I had to know. In a clear outline of fresh mud, there was a single print on the smooth gray of the stone. Not human, but a hoof like that of a horse or goat. It was so fresh, so vivid. It hadn't been there last night when I used the bathroom before I gone to bed, and the soft mud in front of the outhouse door were more of the same. Some of them on top of my own boot prints. If you want to go looking for whatever the hell it was, be my guest. Just be careful with your words out there, because I figured out what was wrong with that voice when I watched the playback of my travel log video. It was my own. I'm writing this to warn you, or to educate you. I haven't decided yet, but you need to understand something. I don't know what I saw, but I do know that I never want to see it again. And I'm warning you, don't go out looking for it. I live and go to college in a small mountain town in Colorado, but often go home to see family as most of them live in Texas. And I'm actually attached to visiting my cat. Now, in order to get home, I have to make most of my drive through New Mexico, through Santa Fe, and about 160 miles through the desert, which if you aren't familiar with, don't try to get acquainted with it. Or if you're planning to go out there, I hope this story will change your mind. On this drive, I had 3 other people with me. My younger sister Andrea, and 2 friends from school, Jess and Katie. It was our spring break, and instead of buying stupid price plane tickets, we decided to pile into my little Mercury vehicle and book it back to Texas. Unfortunately, we left the valley a little later than we were supposed to, because someone, which was actually me, was forgetting their wallet. So by the time we hit the stretch of desert, it was close to 1 a.m. It had been raining since before we headed through Santa Fe. Not super heavy, but heavy enough. It was 65 degrees. I do remember that, because it had been in negatives for quite a while, because of where I go to school, so I was pleased to see something over 5 degrees. For this next part of the story, I need you to understand something. I hadn't been driving that long. I was actually awake. I didn't hallucinate, and I damn sure wasn't the only one who saw it. So please, believe me. We passed a white Prius. As he was driving away, I looked in my rear view mirror and saw something crossing the road, caught in the red glow of the taillights. It was walking with a horrible limp and dragging itself across the road on 2 legs. The motions were unnatural, even jerky. I slammed on my brakes, thinking someone had driven off the road and was stuck or injured. I slid to a stop about 20 feet away from it. The Prius had stopped as well, seeing the person in the road. I opened my door and stuck my head out in the rain to get a better view. It wasn't human. It stopped. The figure was illuminated by the taillights of both of our vehicles. It had to have been at least 7 feet tall, possibly 8. The skin was stretched like a too small shirt, cracking, hanging off its frame in long bloody ribbons. The jaw was almost totally unhinged from its face, the cheekbones disgusting. The skin on the scalp was thin, and spots of bloody white stuck out. And the smell, I had never smelled anything like it. As soon as I opened the door, it hit me. Rotting flesh, meat that has been left out for months, rotten milk, the kind of stuff nightmares are made of. The Prius took off, squealing its tires into the night. But I stayed. Fight or flight hadn't kicked in yet for me. This thing couldn't have been more than 20 feet away. It slowly turned its head, each vertebrae in the neck individually cracking like fucking bubble wrap. We made eye contact, but it had no eyes, only darkness. I slammed my car door shut and sped off. At this point, my friends all woke up and saw it too. Katie was in the back and hysterical. Jess was silent, her mouth set into a grin. Andrea just sat with a look of fear, tears silently streaming down her face. My friend kept screaming, "What the fuck was that? What the fuck was that, Alex?" I didn't know what to tell her. I just kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel as we broke 80. Then something happened that I still, to this day, cannot explain. The temperature dropped during the whole event. It was 30 degrees out. It had been 65 no more than 5 minutes ago. It then began to snow, heavy, wet snow. We ended up pulling over at a gas station called Klein's Corner. No one moved. Andrea was crying, and Jess was praying. Kate was cursing and I was shaking. "What the fuck just happened?" Kate said, all color drained from her face. I looked at her, my face with fear. "I don't know. I don't want to know, but we need to leave." I slowly put the car into drive and continued our trip. I don't remember the rest of the drive. All I know is that everything else was fine. We reached Texas by 6 a.m. Nothing else happened. I'm not sure what it was. The closest I could come to was a Skinwalker. Maybe it was a shapeshifter that had a bad change. I really don't know. Please believe me when I tell you this. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. Don't go looking for it. Don't follow it, because it might end up following you back. In 1987, my family and I moved to Las Cruces, New Mexico, a nice place, smaller than most cities, but interesting. The people there were kind, at least in the inner city. In the neighborhood where my family had moved, everyone was quiet and kept to themselves. Real quaint if you were the type of person who liked those kind of things. For me, I found it odd. No one talked to my family or bothered to communicate while we were staying there. It was like they were hiding some kind of secret. But I did notice one thing. No one came near the house. At first I thought I understood why. The house wasn't exactly in good shape, if you know what I mean. The walls outside were rusted, the grass outside was tall and filled with bushes, and the place looked like a dump. But after a while, I started to notice things. People on the streets wouldn't come near the house at all. They acted as if it was going to devour them or something. Kids on the street would point and stare, and eventually, after I started school, I learned just why the people there were so afraid of our house. You know that place is haunted. That's the first thing someone said to me as I stepped into school. Not even a single hello or a welcome. No, I got nothing of that. At first I was a bit confused. What's haunted? I said to the kid in front of me, the one who decided to make that statement. He didn't say anything. He just turned around and started walking away. I was a bit curious now. I wonder if what that kid said was true, or if it was just some kind of prank, something to pull on the new kid. But I was very wrong. I now know. School went on for a while, and everything seemed fine. My father and mother were happy. My sister, she was happy as well. But I noticed things started to happen to me. I would wake up in the middle of the night with a heavy feeling on my chest. It was as if something was laying on top of me or pressing against my body. But when I opened my eyes, nothing was there. During those nights I swore I was being watched, as if someone was stalking me. There was this dark corner in my room that would appear every night. It was the only part of my room that was invisible during the nighttime. It was from that corner that I felt something watching me, as if someone was standing there. But I was too afraid to ever go and check. Not to mention, I was always very tired, and I tried to shrug it off and sleep, until one night, that is. As I laid in bed that night, I was having trouble sleeping as usual. That heavy feeling on my chest had returned, and it was getting hard for me to breathe. I had this feeling of overwhelming fear, but I didn't know why. It was like I was fearing for my dear life, without any reason. My eyes were open slightly, and as I gazed around the room, I swore I saw the shadows moving in the moonlight, zooming past my vision as if they were getting closer and closer. Eventually, the shadows formed into what appeared to be a man in a dark, long cloak. I then woke up fully. I took a deep breath and I backed up against the wall behind my bed. But after that I couldn't move. It was like I was paralyzed or something. Whatever that thing was, that man was coming closer. It sat down on my bed and it began to crawl towards me. I saw its dark hands press against my covers. The fingers resembled claws of some sort, but that wasn't its most terrifying feature. It had no face, no eyes. It was just darkness, a living shadow. I was panicking now. It kept coming closer and closer until it was in my face. You know, my parents always told me to pray when I felt scared, that God would answer my prayers and protect me. Well, he must have forgotten about me this time, because no amount of prayer whatsoever seemed to be helping. This thing was in my face. Its hands were reaching out, and just as it touched my face, it spoke in the deepest, darkest voice I had ever heard. I couldn't make out what it said. It was speaking in some kind of odd language, but even if it spoke English, I doubt I would have listened. I was too scared, too shaken up to pay attention. This thing spoke to me for I don't know how long, its dark, shadowy figure looming over me as it trailed its claw-like finger across my cheek, cutting into my skin slightly as some blood leaked down into my shirt. I thought this was it. I really thought I was going to die that night. However, I heard a knock at my door. I was relieved in some ways, but I was still scared that this thing was sitting on top of me, and for all I knew, it was about to eat or kill me or something. After the third knock, my mother walked into the room, and she looked over at me. She couldn't see anything. I guess she acted like I wasn't there, as if I wasn't in my room. Maybe that thing on top of me blocked her view. I really don't know, but all hope was drained from my body at that very moment. I figured this was it. I was done for. But in the blink of an eye, I saw that thing get off me. It walked back to the spot where it first formed, and it began to change. My mother had left the room by now, but I was more focused on what this thing was turning into. For a moment, it looked as if I was staring into a silhouette of myself. The creature, the man, this being, whatever it was, it then waved to me, its still dark and shadowy body fading into a black mist. I didn't stay in that room. I got up, I ran downstairs, and I slept on the couch, with every light on possible. The next morning, I awoke early, before everyone else. I packed some clothes, small food, and some extra cash that my father had left in a jar on top of the fridge. I wrote a small note detailing what happened on the counter in the kitchen. Then I left, and I never looked back. I was 17 at the time, but mentally, I felt much older. I eventually crossed state lines, going back to my home state of Texas, where I got a job as a clerk in some crappy little convenience store on the south side of Dallas. Times were tough, but I pushed through. To be honest, I had been wanting to leave home for a long time. I just needed a reason to do it. In some fucked up way, I guess what happened was that reason. But looking back, I never did hear from my family again. I sent them letters, pictures, but nothing. I never got anything back. I figured they either forgot about me, or they simply just didn't care. It wasn't until recently that I began to research on what happened that night. I had been having odd dreams lately. It seemed that this strange, heavy feeling on my chest had returned. I didn't know why, but I felt that if this thing was coming back for me, I wanted to know what it was. I then visited the local library, but I didn't find much interest. The closest I came to anything was an old Navajo legend called Yinadroshi. Apparently, it was a demonic force, or a person that would assume the shape of animals or people. It seemed logical, but I couldn't understand what such a thing would want with me. I was scared. I didn't sleep for 3 days straight, until someone I hadn't seen in a very long time showed up at my door. My mother. She was happy to see me, but she didn't seem that different since when I last saw her. Now mind you, I hadn't seen her for 25 years. I found it a bit odd that she still looked so young, but I shrugged it off. I was happy to see her. So very happy. We talked for a while, but something was off. Every time she looked at me, I got this cold feeling in my body. I felt as if I was staring at a different person. And after a while, I began to feel weak. I was tired. I hadn't slept for days. So I just went up to my room. Before that, however, my mother was telling me how my father left not long after I did, and that he took my sister with her. It was shocking, but I didn't care so much. I just wanted to sleep. But as I lay down in my bed, that feeling returned. That very same feeling I hadn't felt in 25 years. Someone is watching me from the corner of my room. I'm trying not to pay attention. I'm simply going to turn over and close my eyes. I'm not sure though if I'll make it through this night. I don't know if anyone will ever find this, but if you do, please find my family, inform them of what happened here. The journal of John F. Moncada was found thrown in the corner of his room by police earlier this month. He was laying in his bed, calm and lifeless, when they arrived. After examining his journal, police determined that the man had been up for a week or so before he eventually died from a heart attack. They also suspect that the man was hallucinating before he died, as the woman he claimed to be his mother was never there. In fact, She died 23 years ago in a house fire, along with the rest of his family. Strange, his bedroom window was open when the police arrived, and many neighbors claimed they saw a dark figure emerge a few nights ago. Even though there is little proof other than the witnesses' reports, the mirror in his bathroom, however, the police found many strange symbols carved into the glass, those of which were later translated from the Navajo language. There was one word, and it was burden. Police aren't sure if it holds any relevance to what happened here, but the case is now officially closed. Just to give some background, this happened in the mountains, near El Cerro de Tome. Okay, so Friday, 1:28 a.m., me and my friends decided to go for a drive. We sometimes like to go to the Llano, mountains near El Cerro, to experience something that only happens in that area, paranormal and supernatural. Like any other time we do this, we go in my car and drive past Dome Hill, going towards the mountains, and park across from VHS. Then we sit and take in the scenic beauty of the dark desert. We started by listening close to anything and looking everywhere, being hyper observant. At first, we saw a light in the distance, getting within about a mile away from us, then disappearing altogether. We then decided to move on from there because we had to, and I mean had to, see something else. We were driving through roads and flying by at least 30 miles per hour over the speed limit. We then turned down a familiar road. This is the road we knew that something was about to change me and everyone else. It was 4 of us in total. We looked to the right side of the car, saw what we all believed to be something like a hellhound or maybe a skinwalker, when this massive black dog just launched at my vehicle while I was going 45 through the road. We should have felt impact from this massive creature, but we didn't. We then stopped the vehicle, and both people in the back seat looked and saw this thing rise up from the ground. It rose up from the ground and stood straight up on 2 legs, absolutely huge. It was all black with red eyes that are forever imprinted in our minds. I then slammed on the gas, and we sped up to about 55. We took off so fast, and as I looked in my rear view mirror, I could see it. Huge fucking coyote, standing on 2 legs, looking at us as we're driving away. When I was a child, it was just me and my mother. We lived in a property owned by my grandma, a 3-story old farmhouse right at the fringe of the woods. It was far off the road, down a long, unlit gravel driveway. It felt very isolated at night, being so distant from any other houses. It was set in an area that wasn't inhabited for 30 years before we started living in it. Quite often, I was a fairly rambunctious child, so while my mom went off to work, I would occasionally skip the morning bus to school and stay home alone all day. The big house had a habit of feeling incredibly lonely, so I spent most of my time playing in the forest, out in the back, some distance into the woods, far enough that I could hear my mother when she called. There was a toppled pine tree which had crashed into another. An even larger trunk on its way down was now frozen there, forming a long arc over the forest floor. I loved to climb up the jagged stump at the base of this fallen tree and then steady myself to a point just above the middle. I was never able to make it all the way to the top because it just got too steep for me to continue any further. And I had a bad habit of freaking out from how high up I was. One day, I was sitting in my usual spot on the fallen tree, which was a good distance from the ground, just listening to the birds singing and simultaneously feeling the warmth of the sun on my neck, when I heard something strange from underneath that paralyzed me in shock. Hey kid. I was gripped by a sudden strong surge of fear for a moment. The voice had come from directly underneath me. I strained to look down, but I couldn't see anything over the ledge. For a long time, I just sat there in absolute silence, and I was at the point where I was almost soon to convince myself that I had imagined hearing a man's voice at all. I know you can hear me. His voice was much louder this time, as I yelled something out and scrambled up the log a bit higher, trembling nervously. I dug my fingernails into the bark and held tight for dear life. I sat there, trying to collect my nerves for God knows how long. Even though I couldn't see it, the presence of the thing underneath me was still clear, was much softer and more cautious this time. And when I listened closely, I swear I could hear the faintest echo of a human breathing. Gathering all my courage, I vowed to prove to myself that it was all my imagination by leaning over the ledge as far as I possibly could without slipping right off. Digging hard into the bark behind me, I stretched out along my arms and peered over, getting a full view of the empty forest floor and an undergrowth, when suddenly, "Come down here or I'll come up and grab you." It was so loud. It was as if it was being screamed right in my face. I released my grip on the tree in fright and plunged off the platform. I was saved only by grabbing a nearby branch, and for one awful second, my bare legs dangled in the cool air. When I pulled myself up, I ran at full speed to the top of the collapsed pine, to the point I had never reached before. I sat there, just below the rustling canopy, pissing myself and staring at the distant base where the splintered wood rose, fully expecting at any moment to see someone crawling rapidly up the pine towards me. Instead, all I heard was the wind whistling in the leaves above and below me, and occasional snippets of birdsong. It was about 2 hours before my mother got home and found me, after much worry, searching, trembling, and crying at the top of the fallen tree. Although this incident spooked both me and my mother, in time I somehow recovered, exhibiting the naive hard skin of a child, even though I never went as far into the forest as I used to, and never again even approached that fallen tree. Once, when I was 12, I had the chore of taking firewood from the shed out back, just at the edge of the woods, and to bring it back inside the house. It was a tiresome job, and I always chose to do it at dusk, when the air was brimming with mosquitoes and a swampy fog that usually coated the lawn. By the time I had my last round, I would sprint back to the house, spooked. One of my least favorite things about this job was that the shed was full of barn owls. If you have never seen a barn owl's face staring at you from a dark roof corner, then you will know how uncomfortable that shed made me. One of these nights, it got mistier than it had ever been before, A thick silver fog covered everything and limited my line of sight to a short sphere around me. Even though the shed wasn't far from the house, I found myself feeling disoriented, and more than once I walked in the wrong direction, both times for some reason walking straight into the woods. By the time I had reached my last load, it was too foggy to see the street. My eyes stung in the moisture, and it made my vision blur. Lurching forward, I managed to walk headfirst into a tree. Doubling over and dropping all of the wood I was bundling onto my feet with a hard crunch. As I went to pick them up, with my foot throbbing pretty hard, I realized that the ground was too misty for me to see my own knees. I decided to head to the house since we had more than enough wood for one night. However, it was getting to be pretty dark, and I couldn't make out any signs of which direction I was heading in. Even though I cautiously walked for several feet in all directions, trying to figure out my position in the mist, I still couldn't figure out any point of identification. I couldn't even locate the fence or the gate, and the more I walked, the more I seemed to stumble into trees, pine needles, and mud crunching under my feet instead. After a while, I finally realized that I couldn't even find the shed anymore, cursing myself for being so dumb while trying to ignore my thumping heart and sense that something else was at play. I became aware that I was lost somewhere in the forest. I then started screaming out for my mother at the loudest possible volume I could, but was only met with a resounding silence from the depths of the mist all around from where I stood, affirming that I had wandered too far from the house to be heard. As a deep panic started to settle on me, I noticed a glimpse of something pink moving against a nearby pine trunk. Coming closer, I saw that it was a ripped out square of pink paper. On it, there was an arrow pointing left. It looks vaguely like something my mom would make, I rationalized to keep me from getting lost. So I followed the direction set by that green arrow, shivering in the increasing cold. I kept walking for about 5 to 10 minutes before needing to stop to take a breath. My heart was pounding so fast, it was beginning to hurt. As I was sitting down, however, I spied what appeared to be another note hanging on a nearby trunk. I noticed this one was embedded with a long nail. It bore another arrow, this one pointing up, and a small, sloppy written note that said, "This way." Despite my increasing panic, I convinced myself that these notes were my only shot at getting back before nightfall. I was desperate to get the hell out, and my eyebrows were cold with sweat, so I followed the green arrow to a point where I could just dimly make out another spot of pink up an incline of collapsed stumps and leaf litter. At this point, it was getting pretty dark, and I had to strain both my eyes just to see a few meters ahead of me, following the green arrows, feeling more and more lost of where I was. I stumbled through the woods, groping out in the mist to feel for trees, even though I was terrified of something unseen grabbing my arm. I came across the dirt green note, which had another arrow pointing up again. This one led to a steep slope that I didn't recognize being anywhere near my house, and it was with a poorly drawn smiley face right above it. At this stage, I became too freaked to cope and started to cry there a little. As I slumped against the pine stump, the possibility that I would be out in these woods all night was beginning to sink in, like a syringe being driven into the veins within my arm. I caught a glimpse of another pink square in the near distance. Squinting hard, despite the previous week's nonstop rain, I read it from afar. What I read made my blood turn cold. I stood to my knees, dead silently, wobbling on them in fear. My ears were sensitive to any tiny prickle of noise in the mist. For a long time, I stood there in the rolling fog, reading that horrible note over and over again, until a snapping stick somewhere behind me caused me to sprint, blindly, twigs snapping at my ankles and cutting up my face as I ran. Written on the note, in big, green letters, was my name. It felt like I was running for hours. All the while, the rain and mist lapped at the back of my neck, like the decaying breath of someone running right behind me. Somehow, I made it back to the house. All the lights were off, and I struggled to find the keys for a moment. When I found them, I bolted indoors and quickly crawled into bed, where I remained unsleeping till morning. My mom just thought I had come inside and gone to bed and hadn't thought to leave the lights on. It was a miracle, aka some freakish coincidence, that I even found the house that night at all. The final incident at that damn house was witnessed only by my mother. Up until then, she had never experienced any of the strange things as I had, even though we mutually shared the same oppressive quality that the house's interior had on us and its placement in the woods. Although I was obviously never a popular kid, by living way out in the country in the opposite direction from everyone else at my school, I did make some tight friends in my first year of high school. One of these friends, Amanda was her name, invited me over one night and I accepted. My mother drove me out to the place, which was about 3 miles away, then drove back home. The night went well. We watched a horror movie, devoured some pizza, smoked a little pot. My mother went home alone, where she intended to get some writing done. She worked for a magazine at that point. It was about midnight when I received an off-putting text from Mom in all caps. Is this a prank? I need to know immediately. Thinking it was some kind of joke, I texted back, calm yourself. Is what a prank? She responded immediately. Are you at the house? Of course I responded no. I didn't receive another message until around 3 a.m. when she told me to go to my grandma's in the morning and to not by any means dare go home. I remember those drops of rain the day I went to my grandmother's and how terribly soaked I was when I finally got there. It was nearly 2 towns away. I had to fight the temptation to go home and drop off my bags. But Mom's disturbing messages from last night were enough of a warning not to do so. When I arrived, Mom and Grandma were having lunch. At first, my mother seemed to be in some sort of a composed state, but when I got a better look at her, I noticed that all of the color had drained from her face and she was slightly trembling. At one point, she even sent a small glass crashing to the floor after flinching at the cat brushing around her ankles. It wasn't until later that night, when my grandma was sound asleep, that she told me what happened. She even went further as to forbid me from telling old grandma, out of fear that it would horrify her superstitious soul too much. This was what happened the night when I was at Amanda's. and she described it in detail. My mother was sitting on the first story in the living room, where she sat on the couch by the fire, curtains open to the view of the sunset on the canopy, going over her latest draft. At first, it was so faint that she barely noticed it. But after a while, my mother became aware and vaguely irritated by tiny thumping noises near her head at the window. When she went over to investigate, she saw a fat brown moth of a kind we often get at that place, buzzing madly into the glass. Reasoning that this was the cause of the sound, she returned to her work, however, feeling rattled in some way. It was when the noises started to get sharper and louder that she paid more attention and saw that rocks were being thrown at the window from the total blackness of the forest edge. She saw them appear from the shadows of the bush and then fall in an arc and bounce off the window. Looking carefully, she could see some cracks from where some heavy ones had hit, right beside where her head had been moments before. Captivated, she tried to peer into the darkness enough to make out where the rocks were being thrown from. Then, with a startled shock, she jumped back from the window as she saw me standing half behind a tree right near the window, grinning wide and staring at her. My one visible eye stretched wide open, showing all the white. She barely let out a scream, seeing her own daughter standing there, just staring and smiling. Not only did this figure not move or blink, it was standing by one of the nearest pines, far from where the rocks were shooting up out of the bush, as they continued to do so in a loud downpour. My face continued to press out at her, smiling, thinking this was all some kind of sick prank. My mother shouted my name at the top of her lungs. However, instead of responding, the mouth of this thing behind the tree just started moving, as if it were saying words silently, really, really fast. Suddenly, it turned its head to the side, and it seemed to be speaking with someone else behind the tree, my mom said, who couldn't be seen. But she could see a formless black shape hanging against the other side of the tree. The girl that looked like me kept staring at my mother and doing the silent, speed-talking thing, then turning and whispering to the thing next to her. Then she would turn back and start up again. Breaking the spell, she suddenly pointed straight at my mother and started laughing. My mother screamed and fled to my bedroom on the second story, where she shut herself in and sat at the far end of the bed as the rocks began to pitter-patter against the window downstairs. In my room, my mother said she did not feel safe. There was an awful smell and a weird humming noise in the walls, as she described. She tried to pray for a time before giving up and just listening to the rocks pelt the walls and windows. Somewhere in the kitchen, she caught the distinct sound of a window actually smashing and the weird, continuous humming. Listening more carefully, she could identify it as the softest hint of a mumbling voice. In absolute horror, she recognized the voice, and then, too afraid to look, she tilted her head up to the closet door, where an awful, white face could be seen staring right at her, with its mouth contorting and gapping in what sounded like Heidi sped up whispering. The closet door was only a meter from my mother. It then started to open slowly, My mother immediately bolted to the door, only to fumble with the lock as bigger and bigger rocks came crashing through the window, which burst apart in a spray of glass shards before finally getting out. Running out the house, completely keeping her eyes off the woods, getting into her vehicle and driving off. She said that she glanced back right at the end of the drive, and she saw two unmistakable human forms standing at my broken bedroom window, watching as her vehicle got further and further away from our house. This would be their final farewell, as my mother never stepped foot in that place again. As my mother told this story, she broke down into tears. I didn't doubt her, and I still don't. I truly believe that she experienced what she said she did. It was also quite clear that we were done living in that house for once and for all. I only went back once with my dad, who I rarely see now. He came from another state to help us move. Mom had already found a place in town and moved in. My dad and I just loaded up his truck with all that was left inside there. It was silent, sunny morning when we removed all the stuff and emptied the place. I wish I could say there was some closure, some final spooking to cap it all off, but there wasn't. It was just a relief to be out of there. There are, however, two things that I have to mention. When we checked the house for any signs of intruders, we found that several windows, including one in my bedroom and the kitchen, had been smashed and rocks were lying on the floor. 2. Dad went out into the trees for a bit to take a leak. When he came back, he asked me how long we had the swing set for. Needless to say, we never had a swing set, so I was fairly unsettled to discover that in the week since we had been gone, someone had assembled a rope swing set from one of the highest branches of the old pine over the ridge, against which was the fallen log I had stopped climbing many years ago. It was obviously new rope and a nicely polished, sanded down wooden set. Dad, wanting to keep my mind from recent events, said that a neighbor maybe set it up, not realizing it was on our property. Of course, he knew as well as I did that we had no neighbors for at least a mile in any direction. There were no houses in all that space, and never in my time living there did I ever see any other signs of humans living. But I let it all go and was pleased enough just to say good riddance to that horrible place as we drove off for good. For the most part, I found it best to try and forget what happened at that place. Sometimes I just can't help but ponder it, even though it's been long enough now that I no longer feel scared talking about it, but for a long while I couldn't. My grandma just recently sold the house to a new family, that being a young couple and their little son, shortly after we moved out. Despite my mother's desperate insistence that it be left empty, now she refuses to talk about what happened altogether. I'm less anxious about it, even though sometimes I can't help but let my imagination get the better of me. All I can do is think of that old house, the fallen down tree, the new family that moved in, and the swing out back, gently spinning in the breeze, as that little boy toddles, obviously, towards it.